Hey guys! So today you and I are going to talk about passion in code. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, Frederick, is it true that software engineers' passions is shown in the code that they write? Sometimes. I usually say that there are two types of passion for software developers. You have tech passion and you have process passion, the types, where if you meet these people, depending on what stage of their career they're at, you'll see that they usually have inclinations. So the process passion people are usually the sort of people who will show a lot of enthusiasm around things such as, say, pair programming, mob coding, documentation, anything related to Kanban, how you work with sprints or agile or things like that. Basically work frameworks, how you actually, like the social aspects or so forth, administrative aspects of the work. And then you have the tech inclined software developers. They usually are very much into highly advanced or like cutting edge, bleeding edge techniques, tooling. There's many flavors of passion, if that makes sense. And so one of the things that I usually say is that the software developer, they usually go through stages of development, and some never really fully grow up, but it is very much like growing up, where you start out usually not knowing so much as a junior software developer, and then you enter well, it's not my term, but it's a good term, what I like to call the philosopher stage of your career, where you start to sort of realize that there are all these different ways of doing things and so forth, and you start to be very usually to get experimental with ideas and concepts and things like that. And then after a while you enter into the pragmatic master stage, which is another term that is pretty useful, where you're basically mature in the way that you do things. And the reason why these steps is fairly important to understand is because it helps you understand the source of developers that you're dealing with, and like what is a net positive and what is a risk. You see, passion is a great thing, but it's also a dangerous thing. The reason being because passion without skill and maturity, wisdom, all these sorts of things that happen after a while, is usually something that leads to disaster for the net product. Because usually things fall, when you get too experimental with things, you sort of see that things fall apart. And this happens for both types of developers. You have people who do, like, they talk about extreme programming, mob coding, pair programming. We have to move slow so that we can move fast type of people. Like, there's tons and tons and tons of these philosophies where you have to work in accordance with certain practices or follow some type of doctrine of work to do anything with these people. Now, that is true. Like, I actually have had this conversation with many people before, where I say that there is no question in my mind that a level of process is necessary. Being on one of the extremes is silly, saying that no process is the best process versus saying that a lot of processes is like also the wrong idea, because you're basically you're not focusing on the goal, you're focusing on some doctrine that you're trying to follow, which is what usually people who do Scrum, Safe, like all these, like that's what they do. They simply follow a work framework because of the doctrine. They lack, on the other hand, the wisdom and understanding to understand where is the benefits coming in, and what's the thing that's going to make a difference, and what's the thing that is just going to be extra stuff that you need to take care of. That distinction, being able to sort of cut away the fat or cut away the excess from a process, is something that happens when you enter the pragmatic master phase, when you are a true master of process. And then you have technical people who have exactly the same problem, where you have a lot of philosopher software developers who will use very advanced, computer science concepts in a team with like all junior developers, or they will invent their own frameworks, or they will over-engineer things. They will like rewrite code bases over and over in different stacks, or change paradigms every so often, because they are following prey to their passion. They are allowing their passion to go before the health of the overall system. What usually happens is that you end up with a very messy and horrible code base, because it's basically just in a constant state of experimentation. So you never actually settle on anything that is stable and sort of works long term. And the same thing happens here, and the same thing happens when you become a pragmatic master. You start to realize that, well, there are some patterns or tools or things that are actually really useful, like new innovations or things like that, that will make a positive impact. But there's not, that doesn't mean that everything is necessary, and you start cutting things and trying to find the sweet spot of what do you need in order to sort of reach those end goals. And finding this balance in a software developer, I will say, is probably the engineering manager's biggest challenge, hands down. Nothing is more difficult for the engineering manager. I mean, if we just set aside the fact that finding talented software developers at all is a challenge, this is the next one. And it comes down to, do you know how to tell if this is the right person to give this responsibility? That is the key thing. If you take a process passionate super freak who really they have all the right things right there, you love them, they're nice time, and they have all this energy, like it's infectious, right? But if you put them in a team where they're gonna not gonna get to do much, or maybe their ideas are they're gonna basically create a situation where they take over the entire team, there's no balancing factor to them, they might actually slow down the entire project because they lack the maturity to understand that, yeah, it's cool to play around with process, but the deadline is still there. And it's not good if you just say that, well, we're following all these different frameworks, and I'm sorry we're late all the time because, we can't actually deliver due to the fact that I prioritize my passion as a software developer over the results and the goals of the company. That's actually very dangerous, because you might have a really talented, super passionate software developer, but you're not left with any benefits from it because they haven't reached that point where they've truly matured. And on the flip side, if you take a super passionate engineer who's really good with tooling and things like that, and you put them in another project, or you put them in, I've seen that, this is the normal case for me, I see at the very least. You take two random software developers, maybe they're very passionate, maybe not, and you have them build something from scratch. Usually they're, of course, consultants as well. And they work on that thing for a year, and then the system turns out absolute shit. And then I, as the sorry fucker I am, get to take over that project after management sort of realizes that this is unsustainable, and then I see what's been going on. Oh, cool, this is their little sandbox. They have reinvented tools, they have changed paradigms a few times here. I see that there's no testing, there's no thought on quality. They've just kind of played around with things that they thought was kind of cool and inspiring for the moment. So it's a bit like a fraternity type of situation. Yeah, this is us just playing around. And that's also not good. So for the engineering manager, this is truly the really big challenge. It's not just about finding a passionate software developer, it is about finding a project where those passions stand in, where this person's motivation and hunger and talent, all that stuff, can be focused to gain you some type of benefits. Because if you mismatch the project or the task that you need from a person and put them in the wrong situation, even if they're really passionate and have this hunger, you're still going to end up with a really shitty project. I even go as far as to say that one of the best pairings that you can do, which is saying a lot, it's easier said than done as well, is that if you have, say, a philosopher software developer, it's really important to put them into a environment where they have at least one pragmatic master who has enough energy left to educate them into becoming pragmatic masters themselves. Because the passion is very, very powerful, it's very useful. The danger is that when you apply it blindly, it becomes like a purging fire type of thing. It's just something that goes out of control. A little fire that is controlled and has it's going to make a world of difference. But if you just let it spread for or all over the place, you're going to end up with a disaster. So what I want you to take away from this is that, yes, code shows passion among software engineers, you can usually see you see it very quickly. If you see a project which has, you know, all the bells and the whistles, or like they're using very fancy advanced tactics, or like there's always a flavor. You can always, if you go to the documentation section and you see everything is very, very nicely documented and everything is like super defined, or you talk to the team and you see like they run like the full agile playbook or something like that, you can sort of gauge based on how into this stuff they are, who's sort of running the show in terms of like you very quickly figure out who is the one who created all this, and you get that it's almost an energy level, right? You see that there's one or two developers or someone like that who really burns for this sort of stuff. They're usually very easy to spot. The same thing goes for with the coding, where you see people do something advanced in the code or something like that, and you can very quickly see who's been doing most of the more advanced design patterns or things like that, etc., etc. They usually have some type of connection with it. I mean, you can check the Git history and sort of start figuring some stuff out based on, well, if you have the experience to it. These are the things that you usually see with passionate engineers. The thing that I tell you is that the greatest challenge for a engineering manager is to leverage that passion without paying the cost of having that passion go out of control, which is the biggest challenge for the manager. Because if you want passionate software developers who will really keep up to date with the latest tooling and push things and be hungry and engaged and put all of this positive energy into your company and your projects. But if you let them just run wild, it is actually going to turn into a shit show for you many times, because they're just going to do whatever they think is interesting or fun and not actually produce something useful or like sustainable for the company. So you're not gaining something from it, you're actually paying a cost. And I usually say my argument is that companies who don't understand how to pair up the right person with the right team or project or so forth, they usually pay that cost in legacy code. That's the cost that you pay for training junior level developers and for training like philosopher level programmers without a pragmatic master present. The problem is, and that's what every single engineering manager is just gonna like, because I hope that they're nodding in agreement with most of the things I've said now, and then they're all gonna say the one thing that I also know. But Frederick, how do we get the pragmatic master? Because there's not enough of them. How do we find such a person? I go, yeah, I'll let you know when I figure that one out, because you want to find one pragmatic master who can sort of train all these passionate developers from philosophers who cause a lot of damage if they're sort of unsupervised into really good software developers and not pay for all the problems that it has. Well, yeah. Have a great day.